Hi everyone! So today I wanted to make a video about moving out of the mall apartment because that is something I just did. As you can see, I am no longer in a mall apartment. I'm in an actual apartment now with just one other roommate, and it's in Harlem in New York, and I absolutely love it. So I wanted to make a video about moving out of the mall apartment if that's something that you're considering. So we'll talk about pros and cons and the process of moving out and all that good stuff. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, then keep watching. So first things first, let's talk about pros of actually living in the model apartment, because I have lived in model apartments for a longer time than I've been out of model apartments, and there's a reason for that, and there's a reason that I really like that, so I wanted to talk about some of those reasons. So number one, the first great thing about living in a model apartment is that you don't need to find your own place. Most agencies have more than one model apartment, and they're also usually in very good locations. So that's another reason why I love living in model apartments. All of the model apartments I've ever lived in London were quite central. They were close to grocery stores, close to transportation, all that stuff. And I didn't have to find it. The agency already found it for me. So that's definitely one good thing about it. The second good thing I would say is that you don't have to find the money to put out every single month for a model apartment. The agency just puts it on your account and then bills you for it as you start work. So it's not like living in a regular place where you need to make sure, oh my gosh, I have to make sure that I have $1,000 coming in this month because that check is gonna bounce or whatever it is. So that's a good thing about it. You don't need to worry about paying rent every month because the agency just bills you for it. So that definitely takes some stress off when you're thinking about your finances and things like that. The third thing that's good about living in a model apartment that I always liked is it's such a great way to meet girls, meet other models. Sometimes this job can get really, really lonely. So if you're lucky that you find a bunch of girls that you really like living in a model apartment, then a lot of times that's what happened for me, and I stayed because we had a lot of fun. We would go out all the time and work out together and go to our castings together and that kind of stuff. And if I was in a city where I didn't really know people and I wanted to know people, then I would choose to stay in the model apartment because otherwise I would just be by myself all the time. And last but not least, like I said, usually model apartments are in good locations. Most of the time, actually, most of the model apartments I've lived in have always been in good locations. I have nothing to complain about really. They're always close to the city, close to transport, and all that kind of stuff. That's what's important to me. So those are my 4 pros of living in a model apartment. Now let's get to the con. I would say the biggest con to living in a model apartment is that you almost never have your own room. I would say the biggest con to living in a model apartment is that you almost never have your own room. I've only seen a couple of model apartments where you have your own room, and the agency will usually charge you more for that if you have your own room, or it's like a first come first serve thing. So the chances of you getting it are very, very small. Secondly, another big con is that model apartments are usually very expensive. They charge you per night for model apartments, so it could be anywhere from like $30 to like $50 a night, and that adds up a lot. And especially if they're in a good location, which they usually are, it's going to be quite expensive to live there. So that's definitely one of the cons. As it adds up, you may not be putting that money out every month, but then when you look at your statement and you see how much they do take out every month, it's usually upwards of $1,000, if not closer to $2,000. Which is really, really expensive sometimes, considering that, sometimes we have times when we only work once for the whole month. So it's very easy to get put in debt with your agency if you're in a model apartment because it's usually very, very expensive. Another con to living in the model apartment is that girls are always in and out. So that could be a good thing because sometimes, even though you're in a room with like 5 other bunk beds, if girls are always in and out, there could be times where you have the room to yourself. So that could be a good thing, but it's more likely going to be a bad thing because when girls are always in and out, they tend to leave messes, they tend to leave things lying around, they tend to, things can just cause a real ruckus when people are always moving in and out of a place. It tends to be really noisy, flights are at all kinds of different times. So when you have girls moving in and out like that, you don't get to know anybody. It's just, the house is just chaotic and crazy all the time, especially around like fashion week and times like that. So I think that's definitely a con. And I would say my 4th and last con is that you end up living with about 6 or 7 other people, usually. Luckily, my apartments in London that I lived in were never more than 2 people at a time. So yes, I was sharing a room with one other person. It wasn't like a lot of apartments in New York where you're sharing your room with, say, anywhere from 4 to 6 people at a time in bunk beds. So it's not usually very comfortable. You're sharing your room with a lot of people. There isn't a lot of room to put your stuff. A lot of times when I was in model apartments, I didn't have any room in the closet because sometimes the girls just weren't nice enough to move their stuff. So I would basically be living out of my suitcase for like months and months at a time. I couldn't even unpack any of my stuff. So that's definitely a con as well. Just living with a lot of people can be very irritating. Your You never have your own space. You're always sharing bathroom time. You almost never have enough room to put your stuff in the fridge or shelves in the kitchen, things like that. It gets really crazy at model apartments when you have like 7 or 8 girls in an apartment. It gets pretty intense. So that's definitely a con, is that you sometimes end up living with like upwards of 5 people, which can be a really difficult thing to deal with. So now we're going to talk about the pros of moving out. There are so many pros to moving out, I can't even tell you, but you know, there's a reason why I stayed in model apartments for that long as well, which I'll get into when I get into my experiences of moving out of model apartments. But first things first, so pros of moving out of the model apartment. Number one, I would say, is that you have your own room. I never realized how much I took for granted having my own room until I lived in model apartments. It's just privacy, it's just about, you know, having your own space, being able to unpack your stuff, that kind of stuff. It's just really important, and it really adds to the quality of your time living at a place and staying somewhere. So definitely I would say the number one thing is being able to have your own room. The number two thing I would say is having cheaper rent. Most of the time when I moved out, I ended up paying half, if not, maybe I would end up paying about 60% of what I had to pay at the model apartment, if not less than that. Like sometimes I paid half of what I paid at the model apartment. And that's because the agencies charge you nightly, which I understand, because sometimes girls only come in for like 2 weeks or something. So in order for the agency to make money, they have to charge you per night. Or if a girl only comes in for 3 days for a job, obviously if you're going to stay there, they have to charge you, so they're going to charge you per night. One that becomes an issue is when you stay upwards of a month. Then it ends up being a lot of money. You could end up paying like $2,000 a month in rent to share a room with 5 other girls. It doesn't always make sense. You know what I mean? So living on your own usually means that you're going to end up having cheaper rent. Another good thing about living on your own is that you're definitely going to end up having more space in your kitchen, more space in your room, more space in your living room. You're probably not going to be sharing your place with that many people anymore, which is going to be great, because that means you might actually get a seat at the table to eat your breakfast. So that's definitely a pro as well, is that you're definitely going to be living with a lot less people. You're going to have way more space in the kitchen and stuff like that. And then that leads me to my fourth pro, which is you're going to be living with less people. So you don't need to wait as long to use the bathroom or to watch TV or whatever it is that you want to do that you took for granted before. You're going to be able to do those things when you move out, because you're probably only going to have 1 or 2 other roommates as opposed to 6 or 7 other roommates. Now, there are also some cons that you need to consider of moving out. Number one is that this time you have to make sure that you have the money every single month coming out of your account, whether you give your landlord checks or you're paying cash or you're paying month to month. You need to make sure you have that money to give them every single month, or else you're gonna get kicked out. And then number two, when you're looking for a cheaper rent, you're probably not always gonna find places in the best locations. They're probably gonna end up being further away than the model apartments were, but that's kind of the price you pay to have cheaper rent, but also to have your own space. Another con of living on your own is that you don't have the security of the model apartment always being there. Because the agency charges you nightly, you can always go back to the model apartment. You can leave and come back whenever you want, and the agency will always have, most likely, usually they'll always have a bed ready for you, if, you know, as long as the model apartment isn't full. But when you're renting somewhere, you don't know if, you know, if you leave for a month or a couple weeks, if you come back, if this place is still going to be available. So you definitely don't have that security anymore that you do have with a model apartment. And last but not least, because now you pay a month-to-month lease as opposed to nightly like you do at the model apartment, and this is what happened to me in London, sometimes, you know, we don't always control where we go and when we go. So if we've already paid a full month's rent and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you just got a contract in Greece or whatever for 3 months, well, then you've already paid your full month's rent in New York, but you only use that place for 2 weeks. So paying a month-to-month lease for us is not always the best idea, because, you know, we travel so much. So you really need to have like more secure travel plans if you're going to do a month-to-month lease, or try to come up with an agreement with your agency. But a lot of the time that's not able to happen, and that's just something that you have to accept when you're going to move out, is that you may end up paying, you know, a full month for a place, but you may only be there for 2 or 3 weeks, because we just move around all the time. Okay, so those are the pros and cons of both situations. So now I just want to talk about the process of moving out. I recommend subletting or doing like month-to-month agreements with people. I don't necessarily like going through landlords usually, or letting agencies or anything like that, because there's no point in us having such a long contract or a long relationship with any of these people, because we're gonna leave. Like, we're only gonna be there for like 2-3 months at a time usually. If you know you're gonna be there for longer, then you may want to look into having a landlord, or going to a letting agent or a broker or something that's gonna find you somewhere for like a year lease or something like that. But for me, because I tend to move around or base myself somewhere different like every 3 months, that kind of doesn't really make sense for me. So I either go on Craigslist or Gypsy Housing, or just mouth to mouth. You'll find people so much. Like, there are so many people renting out their places. The place that I'm in now, which is gorgeous and I love it, I found because one of my friends, her roommate was leaving for a month and was subletting her apartment. So she was subletting her room. So that's how I found it. Like, I don't even necessarily, especially within like the artistic community, especially within the creative industry, so many people have places and they're always subletting and renting out rooms. So if you talk to people, like just whisper around that you're looking for somewhere, I can like 90% guarantee you that you will get some offers, because people are always looking to rent out their spaces, especially in busy cities like New York and London. In London, when I was looking for a place, I went on Spare Room and Rightmove and those kind of websites. In New York, I go on Craigslist or Gypsy Housing, just to give you a few recommendations. There are 3 things that are super duper important to me when I'm moving in somewhere. So I'm just letting you know the kind of things that I look for when I'm moving in somewhere. Number 1, I like to make sure there's a lot of natural light. I cannot deal with a place that doesn't have a lot of windows or, you know, just doesn't have good lighting. I don't want to live somewhere dark. I'm not going to pay a lot of money to live somewhere that's really dark. So that's number 1. Number 2, I like to make sure that it's near to transportation. I don't want to walk over 5 minutes to go to the subway. I know the kind of person that I am. If I need to do that, it's just going to make me want to stay in bed longer, because I'm thinking, oh God, I have to walk like, you know, 10 minutes to the subway. Like, I don't want to walk longer than 5 minutes to the subway or the bus stop or whatever it is. I want to make sure that I'm close to transportation from where I'm living, because it doesn't encourage you to get up in the morning when you know you have to walk so far to get to where you're going, if you catch my drift. And last but not least, something that people usually forget to consider is laundry. I want to make sure there's either a laundry room in the actual building or that there's a laundromat close by, because the last thing you want is to have to like travel really far to do your laundry every 2 weeks. It's just not convenient. So for me, those are the top 3 things. I'm not very picky on like size of room, size of living room, that kind of stuff. I just, as long as I have my own room and it's a comfortable space, I'm fine. I'm not very picky with that kind of stuff. But those 3 things I've realized I just absolutely cannot compromise on. I need those 3 things to be there, or else I will definitely not take the place. I think there are other things to consider, such as is there air conditioning? The place that I live in right now doesn't have air conditioning, but we use fans and it's totally fine. Other things you want to consider if they're important to you are size of the kitchen, size of the bathroom. You want to make sure also that all these places have good piping and good electronics and they're clean and all that kind of stuff. Of course, like that stuff is just a given. Another thing that you might forget to consider is a cleaner. A cleaner always comes with a model apartment, and they usually come every 1 to 2 weeks. So you want to make sure, or you want to find out if there's going to be a cleaner in your place that you're renting, how much it's going to be, how often they're going to come, all that kind of stuff. The majority of places that I've looked at in New York, they usually do have cleaners, and it's usually like $20 a person or whatever whenever they come, and they usually come every 2 weeks or something, or in this place they come once a month. So yeah, that's definitely something that you want to consider as well, because if that's an extra cost that you don't want to incur, then that might not be the place that you want to move into. And last but not least, I think location. Like, they say it because it's important and it's true. You need to consider where you're living. Do you mind having a long commute every day? I personally don't mind. If the subway is close and I need to go 30 minutes to get where I'm going, I don't mind. I really don't mind. So that's just me. But you need to make sure, like for me, our last model apartment was in New Jersey. I didn't want to be in New Jersey anymore. It wasn't that it was even that far or anything like that, but I just wanted to make sure I was in the city. Now I live in Upper Manhattan. It's a perfect location. It takes me 20 minutes to get to Midtown. It's where I want to be. It's a great space. I love it. So location is really, really important, because when I lived in London, I lived in somewhere in zone 4, if anybody knows what that means. So it was really, really far, and it just wasn't convenient at all. And I thought, you know, oh, I'm so close to the bus. I'm so close to the subway. It's fine. But it took me like 40 minutes to get into the city every day. And I think 40 minutes is pushing it a lot. And it really didn't make me want to get out of bed or do anything, because I just thought, geez, it's going to take me forever to get into the city. That's not what I want. So that kind of put a damper on things. So you need to make sure that you're considering the length of commute that you want to take and where the location is, if that's something that's important to you, which it should be. Oh, and then also what's really important is the person that you're living with. I'm living with another model right now that I know from Canada. She's super nice. I like her a lot. She's super clean. Like, we share food. Like, she's really, really nice, and I really like her. So you just want to make sure that you know who you're living with and that you like them and that you can live with them as a person, because that could really make your life really hard. In London, when I moved out, like I said, I didn't do enough research. I lived with a family because the rent was cheap, but not only was it too far, it was just very awkward living with that family. Like in her advertisement, the woman said that she was very bubbly, and she wasn't bubbly at all when I met her. And I'm a very bubbly person, so that's why I wanted to live with somebody that was like outgoing and stuff like me. And she wasn't at all. She was very quiet. It was very awkward. They seemed to have a lot of family issues going on because I always heard like yelling and fighting and stuff like that. And I just thought, you know, if you're in that kind of position, you may not want to be renting your place out to people because it can make people feel really uncomfortable. I don't know. Maybe they didn't know that stuff was happening. Maybe it was like a situational thing and it just kind of happened randomly. I don't know. But for me, it just was not, like, I'm not judging them at all is what I'm saying. Like, I know that people have issues. I'm not judging them at all. I'm just saying for me personally, I wouldn't live with a family again because of that. It was just very uncomfortable for me. I felt very out of place. I felt like I was like this weird guest in their house and just not very welcome, and I didn't like it, so I wouldn't do that again. But so I think that's definitely really important. You need to think about who you're living with. Do you get along with them well? Are you comfortable with them? Are they clean? Anything that's important to you, you need to make sure all of those things are in line before you move in with someone. So that's basically it. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please be sure to leave a comment below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!